Void Mind Ajahn Buddhadasa. 2 Dhamma lectures presented on 10 or the 17th of July 2525, 1982, at Tsung Mokhablara. Now we will take a look at the void, or free, mind, something much misunderstood even though it's an important matter, the heart of the Buddhist religion. There are those who misunderstand the void mind concept, those in opposition to it, those who make a joke of it, those who criticize it, those who slander and say unpleasant things, those who pretend that it's something bad, and so on. There are some who say that the mind can't be void, that there must be some thinking, that if the mind is void, there won't be any thought, so that the body will be like a piece of wood and incapable of doing anything. We say, however, that all activities should be done with a void mind, but some people don't understand that. There are even those who claim that if the mind is void of me and mine, then there's no one to be responsible for anything, no one to try to do anything, to develop anything, and that we would be somehow imperfect as people because of that. Some also say that if the mind is void, there won't be any patriotic feeling and no regard for religion, even for our own family. There are those who charge that the void mind isn't a Buddhist principle at all. Instead, they say that it's something made up by the speaker to fool people with. So, we can see how this concept is misunderstood, even though it's very important, because people need to be aware that if the mind isn't sometimes void, then the results can be terminal. People survive because the mind is void from time to time, so they can rest and relax. If the mind is troubled and depressed by the feelings connected with the me and the mine, then madness is a possibility or some nervous disease. If the mind can't stop and can't relax at all, there could even be death. This is something we need to know, that we can survive in a reasonably sane manner because the mind naturally experiences voidness from time to time. And at such times there is physical relaxation and contentment, and the mind is best able to think and to function. Now, regarding the void, or free, mind, we will split the matter up into 3, voidness by way of samadhi, voidness by way of vipassana, and voidness by way of nature, the voidness that happens quite naturally. The voidness of samadhi occurs when someone is in any level of jhana. When fully concentrated, there is freedom from defilement, and the mind is fixed on the components of the jhana, or on the sign of concentration. At such times, the self-thought is absent. There's no thinking that I have entered jhana, or that I'm concentrated. If there is, then there is no possibility of it really being samadhi. So we need to forget the I completely and leave the mind to fix on the nimit, on the object of samadhi, until the factors of jhana arise fully. In all levels of jhana, the mind has the characteristic of being free of the self idea. In the Pali texts, this is called inner voidness. There isn't anyone doing the knowing. This is freedom. At such a time, there's no defilement, no nivaran. The obstacles to concentration are put to sleep, as it were. The thoughts of me and mine are absent and there is concentration. In this kind of experience, there is contentedness, purity, and stability, but there is also agility of the mind, kammaniya, which is to say that the mind is nimble, quick and able to do its proper duty. Such a mind can do anything well. If the mind isn't like this, then it isn't in samadhi and won't be able to function properly. Hence, we can work with a void mind, especially where it involves the mental work connected with the attainment of the path, fruit, and nibbana. It is said that if the mind is not void and not free, then it's not in samadhi. But if it is in samadhi, then that is freedom in itself. This is the mind made void by way of samadhi. Now, voidness arises through the practice of vipassana, that is, through clear seeing into the Dhamma, into the way things really are. This is about investigating anything to see it as it actually is, to contemplate the world, for instance, and see it as void of any meaning of self. As the texts have it, attain va attaniyen va sunyo loko, the world, the whole business, no matter what, the entire world is void of self. There is only a flow of idapachayata. There is no self entity involved. There's nothing that could be clung to as a possession. This entire world is just a paticca samuppan dhamma. A paticca samuppan dhamma is something arisen in dependence on other things. The world, because it's not self-existent, must have come to be in dependence on other things, so it's called a paticca samuppan dhamma. Mutual dependence can be seen in everything, in all things in the world at large. A stone or a grain of sand cannot exist by itself and must arise in dependence on something, must depend on something else. A tree arises in dependence on many things. For an animal to exist, it depends entirely on the necessary conditions being present. Even us, we are born and we continue to live out our lives in dependence on a certain set of conditions being present. The world, the solar system, the sun, the moon, the stars, everything, the entire universe, all are like this. All are dependently arisen. Suppose somebody believes that God makes everything happen. Well, that would be sort of right, but we would rather say that things arise in dependence on the law of nature, the law of idapachayata, the law of conditionality, which is the same as any God. The law of idapachayata makes everything happen. There wasn't a sun or a solar system until the law of idapachayata caused them to appear. When the globe of a world forms, then it supplies the causes and conditions for the arising of everything that will populate it. First, a world is a ball of fire which gradually cools down, gradually hardens and dissolves into the various elements and then into the various things. All of this happens in dependence on the conditions being present for it to happen. Try to remember these words, even if they are a little strange. Paticca means, in dependence on, samuppan means, arisen, paticca samuppan means, something dependently arisen. There isn't anything that isn't dependently arisen, except for one thing, except for Nibbana. But apart from that, all things are so. In this body of ours, every cell is dependently arisen, every particle, every atom, everything that we believe to be me or mine. Now, this me and the mine belief, is it right or is it wrong? Do we believe in something that disagrees with the truth of nature? Well, Dhamma represents the fundamental truth of nature, and the truth of nature is that everything is actually dependently arisen. When we manage to see in this way, then we know that all things are void of self, that there is only the flowing on and spinning around of paticca samuppan dependently arising and ceasing without end. If we see like this, then we see voidness by way of vipassana. If we have true wisdom, we will see all of the forms, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and mind objects, all of those sense objects as dependently arisen and void. So, don't fall in love with anything that is void. Don't fall for the beautiful forms, sweet sounds, fragrant odors, delicious tastes, soft touches, and the sort of feelings that delight the mind. Know the sense organs, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and the mind as being void too. In reality, the eye isn't self-existent. It doesn't have a self. It's basically the natural element called the Rup Dhatu, the material element, which forms the eyeball, the nerve of the eye, and everything to do with the organ called the eye. Then, there is the wonderful element called the Vinyan Dhatu, the consciousness element, by which, whenever the eye sees, a form will come to do its duty, will arise to know the seeing. This is the way it is according to nature. There isn't a self who sees. There is just the seeing taking place according to basic, natural principles. Because there is the eye which is complete and there is an external sense object, a visible object to meet the eye, then the consciousness element will come and do its duty at the eye, and the eye will see the form. The particulars of that then go to the mind to be processed. The mind, however, isn't a self either. If we know in this way, then we know voidness through the Vipassana method. Observe anything. Observe all things together, observe them separately, observe the body internally, the body externally, and observe other people, the whole world. When we see this internally, then we will see it externally too. If we see voidness in ourselves, we will also see it in others. We will see how this world is void, how other worlds are void, and we will know voidness by way of the clear understanding that's born of wisdom. Now, regarding the voidness that occurs naturally, here we need to understand that the normal mind, the mind when there's nothing interfering with it, when it's without the hindrances, without the defilements, is luminous. At such times it could be called the original mind, as it was in the womb. The intermittent disappearance of that luminosity happens because defilement enters, bringing with it the feelings of me and mine. For example, the mind meets anything that causes satisfaction, and then there is desire, tanha, followed by a clinging, upadan, to the idea that there is a desirer, a me, who desires. It's in this way that the self-sense arises, that there comes to be a me, who desires to get something so that it can be mine. Me and mine are really vain and nonsensical, but not in our understanding. There isn't anyone who would allow or could easily accept that the me and mine aren't realities because they are the most powerful feelings in the minds of human beings. But observe how terrible the arising of the me and mine is, and recognize that they aren't permanencies. Know that they come and go, that they arise intermittently, and know that if they don't arise, then the mind is in its original, luminous, naturally void state and without us having had to do anything at all. If there isn't any reason for the mind to lose its luminosity, then it will be in its original state quite naturally, it will be naturally void. So, the free or void mind can arise in different ways. Void because of samadhi, void through vipassana, or void because it's returned to its original state quite naturally. However, it needs to be said that the samadhi mind, the void mind fixed on an object of samadhi still feels, so it's not that there isn't any thinking. At that time, there will still be feeling, so there will be some form of thinking too. The mind that is void through the power of vipassana considers, investigates, penetrates, and intuits into the reality of things, so it isn't void, in the way that a stone, for instance, would be. The luminous, original mind still thinks and feels too, but without the defilements. It's naturally clean and unblemished and can think and feel in the way that is natural to it. The Pali word for mind means think, so if the mind can't think, then it isn't really a mind at all. Thus, void here doesn't mean that there's no thought or feeling. It means void, or free of the sort of feeling and thinking that causes trouble, that brings upset. After all, who likes trouble and strife? The troubled mind can be compared to a fire, in that it's hot in the way of being tense and unbalanced. Now, who likes that? Who likes stress and tension, trouble and strife, unhappiness and depression? Nobody at all. That stress, trouble, and depression is a me and mine affair, and when me and mine are gone, then there is the normal mind, a mind without stress, without depression. This mind we call void, but it's not void in the same way that a stone would be. The normal mind is contented, cool, a useful mind, and, better still, it's able to understand everything deeply, to know anicca, dukkha, and anatta, to know the deep, and thus is able to escape from suffering. Hence, the mind free from the defilements, from the feelings of me and mine, is very useful because it allows us to live contentedly, to think well and clearly, to advance in deep matters so that we can perhaps realize Nibbana, or if we prefer, come to know God. Consequently, we consider this to be important and necessary knowledge, which is why we offer it to you. There is another form of naturally occurring voidness which manifests when we sleep because at such times, the mind is void, but as there's no thinking when we are asleep, then it's another kind of voidness, not the one we want here. Dogs and cats can experience this kind of voidness too, so it isn't a matter of skillful, virtuous living. Nonetheless, it does help life to be restful, relaxed and not too crazy. This sort of voidness, however, isn't enough to normalize the mind. For that to happen, it needs to have the voidness that arises through it being well and correctly controlled in accordance with Dhamma, and through not allowing that to arise because if the mind is full of defilement, it can't rest. There is sleeplessness, and there can be madness. The uncaused sleeplessness bring a shortfall in rest and relaxation, and such a state of affairs can end in insanity or death. So, recognize that voidness is a necessity, something human beings must have, something that sustains the mind, allows it to be normal, to be cheerful and bright, to grow and prosper, to be luminous, and to become superb. Whenever the mind is fresh and bright, cool, happy, and peaceful, then take good note of it because this kind of mind is without the defilements. It's not being worried by the me and mine. Perhaps when we know this void mind as something beneficial, then we will try to sustain it. So, it's not that the void mind doesn't think about or feel anything, that it doesn't feel responsibility, doesn't recognize good and evil, or whatever. That's a counter-argument of the foolish void mind contingent because there are those who really don't understand this at all and who talk about the sort of void mind that would, for instance, understand killing things, killing people as not being an evil matter, who make out that the void-minded would be incapable of doing anything useful or beneficial. But they misinterpret the meaning of the void mind. This, then, is the matter of the free, or void, mind. If the mind is void, there is contentment, freedom from depression or anything of that sort, there is normalcy, well-being, calmness, and then, when we think or do anything, we can think and do whatever we have to do well. We will also be in a position to experience deep truths because when the mind is void, then it's 100 or 1000 times more skillful than, for instance, a computer. If the mind is troubled, however, if there is the heat of suffering, tension, or depression, then we can't think or do anything particularly well. Most importantly, however, this voidness sustains our lives. If we were without water to drink, we would soon die, and in the same way, if the mind wasn't sometimes void, wasn't ever free, we would soon go mad. There has to be enough voidness to slow down thinking and relieve unhappiness, to allow the mind to relax and to become normal again. If there were a depressed mind, a hating mind, a troubled mind for just one day, it would be different for different people. We could go mad, and if the mind was like that for several days, then we would probably go completely haywire and might even die, simply because we would suffer too much. So, maintain the mind well and allow it to develop the characteristics of a void mind. We will take the opportunity here of talking about the word void a little more. Void is a rendition of the Pali word sunya, while sunyat means voidness. Previous generations heard these words quite a lot because they frequently cropped up in sermons, but these days they're not often mentioned and had not been much preached about until we brought them out again. Now, we say that the word sunya is misunderstood and that it actually means void, in the same way that the word vacuum means airless. A vacuum is without air, is void of air, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing at all. People interpret this word according to their tastes, and they do translate it as void, but as void in the sense of nothingness. Thus it's translated partially correctly because it does mean void, but not void in the sense of there being nothing at all, because that would have no value and no use. Sunya means void or free of something, in the same way that a vacuum is free of air. Hence, it's the sort of voidness that has use. We ought to understand this word properly. In the Pali texts it has Nibbānam Parama Sunyam, which translates as Nibbān is the ultimate voidness. Now, would we translate that as Nibbān is the ultimate nothing? Nibbān is the ultimate freedom, the ultimate voidness, but what is it void of? Well, ask yourself the question, what do people want to be free from? They want to be free from the undesirable, from the defilements, from dukh, from all that troubles and disturbs, from all of the various problems. Nibbān represents absolute freedom from those things. The people who interpret Nibbān as the ultimate nothing destroy its meaning completely. In the texts, there are many other passages that reveal this void as something other than mere nothingness. The Buddha's mind dwelt in the sunyata abiding, sunyata vihar, that is, he dwelt with his mind touching sunyata, free from any disturbance, knowing all things as they really were as void of self. Now, if it was said that the Buddha dwelt with an empty, vacant mind experiencing nothingness, that would make the Buddha worthless or make him out to be mentally deficient. The Buddha dwelt in the void, free from the things that disturb, entirely free of the self-delusion. We should understand the meaning of sunyata properly. It means free or void of self, that everything is void of self, of me and mine. Something that we can grasp easily is the voidness of a stone. A stone on the ground doesn't have a self, so it's obviously void of the meanings of me and mine. However, when we come to consider our offspring or ourselves, we don't see this voidness. We see a self, we see me, and we see mine. The me and mine happen in accordance with natural principles, but they aren't real. The mind can think in any way at all, but when it thinks wrongly, the results are going to be wrong too, and it's then that there can be tanha, ignorant desire, and upadān, clinging to the desire as being me or mine. These concepts can easily arise from any appropriate experience. Void means free from the meanings of me and mine. Void of the thought, the perception of me, of the understanding that this is me, of the clinging to the idea of a self, of the underlying tendency of the mind to self-belief, and void of the familiarity with me and mine. There is voidness on all levels, the mind is void of defilement and void of dukh, dis-ease, distress, suffering. This is worthy of our interest. If we regard the defilements as being all about selfishness, then of the root defilements of lobh, dosh, and moh, lobh, greed, will manifest as the desire to get something, to make something mine; dosh, aversion, will manifest as desire to, and possibly as anger because of not getting something to be mine; while moh, delusion, will manifest as infatuation, spinning around, understanding that it is me who is interested but who is uncertain as to how to respond to the situation. All the forms of defilement are a matter of self. As for dukh, the word has two basic levels of meaning, and if they get mixed up there can be problems. It's said that all anything conditioned, anything arisen in dependence on a cause are dukh, which means that all conditioned things are impermanent, prone to change, and thus quite naturally dukh. A stone, for instance, as an impermanent thing must have the characteristic of being dukh. As for dukh as suffering, that only appears if clinging occurs, because then it will be a matter of mental dukh, of suffering, for whoever does the clinging. Even a stone, if we cling to it as mine, means suffering for the mind to bear with. Dukh in its first meaning accords with the principle that if anything is unstable, changing, or impermanent, then it's dukh. This isn't mental suffering but the basic characteristic of dukh, that which can give rise to suffering. So, dukh, one meaning is to have the quality of being dukh, and another is of pain in the mind, mental pain. If the mind is void, it doesn't have the suffering, the mental pain, because there is the knowledge that all things have the basic characteristic of being dukh, and that to cling to them will be a problem. Thus, there is recognition of the benefit of not clinging, which is what prevents suffering from arising. The void mind is free from foolishness and able to think intelligently in conjunction with full mindfulness and right knowledge. When the mind is depressed or unhappy, then whatever mindfulness and wisdom we possess is forced, halting, and sketchy. When the mind is void, without depression or unhappiness, it has the attributes that allow it to perform perfectly full mindfulness and a clear understanding. Foolishness comes from the defilements, from lobh, dosh, and moh, greed, aversion, and delusion. But sweep out the defilements completely, and the mind clears up completely, and then mindfulness and wisdom return to guide our activities. Thus, voidness is useful, endowing the mind with the attributes that allow it to do its duties properly. The mind freed from the defilements is more mindfully aware than at any other time. We can experience normal mindfulness and clear understanding on condition that the mind remains undefiled. Thus, observe that when the mind is freed from that which makes it unhappy, when it's free from the defilements, free of me and mine, it is bright and contented and exhibits what we might call normal awareness. Now, let's suppose for a moment that a pill could be made for us to swallow that would produce the void mind. But even if that could be done, it wouldn't produce the sort of void mind we are talking about. Even if scientists could make a medicine for us to take which, once taken, produced voidness so that there was no dukh, no heat at all, it wouldn't be the voidness we are talking about here. Rather, it would create an addiction which would prove ultimately very harmful. We shouldn't look for quick fixes, like some kind of pill that will easily bring us the free mind, bring Nibbana. It would be madness to do that, and it can't happen. If there is to be the voidness of the Buddhists, then it must be a matter of mental correctness. So, looking at the benefits of voidness, the voidness of the void mind, what is its value? What is its use? From what has already been said, we know that there will be contentedness along with the efficiency peculiar to the void mind, but now we want to point out the advantages clearly. Making the mind void will be the same as getting a taste of Nibbana, a sample of Nibbana from time to time, because whenever the mind is free from the, then we get a touch of the ultimate. We experience a little Nibbana, a sample of it, just for a time, and perhaps this might happen several times during the course of one day. Hence, we have temporary Nibbanic experiences to sustain us. It's necessary that we experience this form of Nibbana often enough during the day and night for us to stay reasonably normal. Otherwise, we would have nervous problems and perhaps become really mad. So, having some mental freedom is the same as having a little Nibbana infiltrate life every day. We would also have above average mindfulness and wisdom. Generally speaking, people have average mindfulness and wisdom, but if we want to upgrade, to have miraculous mindfulness and wisdom, then we need to make the mind void, let the mind be free. If we want to study well, to speak well, to write well, to compose well, to do anything well, then let the mind be void and mindfulness and wisdom will do their various duties marvelously. Deep, wonderful thinking can happen when the mind is void of defilement, when the mind gets out from under the pressure of the. If the defilements still have the mind by the throat, then there is no possibility, no way that it can think freely, or do anything particularly well, and then even writing a letter properly will be difficult, even talking will be difficult. Hence, we would have the power of the free mind to enable us to do our duties well. Now, here is something funny. When the mind is void, then the king of death won't be able to find us. The king of death will search for us but he won't find us. When the mind is freed from the feeling of being, me, it doesn't feel that, I will die, thus it doesn't know death. The Buddha said this, one who has mindfulness and sees the world as void, then the king of death seeks for, but doesn't find them. Dwell seeing all worldly things as void and we won't entertain any fear of death. Then the king of death won't be able to find us, and we will have escaped his grasp. Let him seek wherever he will, as much as he wishes, but he won't find the void-minded because such a one is free of me and mine and dwells above birth, aging, sickness, and death. In Thailand, we chant about how we ordinarily have sickness, old age, and death and cannot escape them, which is true because we are ignorant and have self-belief, and then we get what we deserve. That is, we get born, to age, get sick, and die. It's what we deserve. We have a self, a me, so we're not free and have to be born in order to die over and over again. The Buddha once told his attendant, Ananda, Ananda, whenever anyone dwells with us, the Buddha, as their Kalyanmit, Kalyanmit means, good friend, they, being ordinarily subject to birth will escape it, being ordinarily subject to aging will escape from it, being ordinarily subject to sickness will escape it, being ordinarily subject to death, will escape death. But how is it that we can escape birth, aging, sickness, and death by taking the Buddha as our good friend? Well, the Buddha taught freedom from self-belief. He taught how to let go of it, and being free of self, then birth, aging, sickness, and death may search for us but they won't find us, that is, we won't have a self to be born, to age, to get sick, and to die. Make the mind free of self, and then birth, aging, sickness, and death won't be able to dominate it. This will be a benefit of voidness. The mind free from the influence of defilement, without the hindrances, without the defilements, without the underlying tendencies of mind, without the inflows, is a powerful mind. Some schools of thought hold that the void, the free mind is an impossibility and that we must have the defilements throughout our lives, that there isn't going to be any time when the mind will be free from them. Now, we say that they aren't always present because there isn't anything that is permanent. There isn't anything that's eternal, that's truly unchanging. The defilements come and go from the mind in dependence on the causes and conditions being present, so end the causes and conditions, and the defilements will end too. Through developing sufficient mindfulness and clear understanding, we can live producing the right sort of conditions in such a way that the defilements that would normally arise wouldn't get the opportunity, and even the smaller problems like the 5 wouldn't happen. The mind of an ordinary, worldly person isn't void, isn't free because it's afflicted by defilement, by tanha, craving, and by upadan, clinging, attachment. What is craving like? Craving drags the mind here, there, and everywhere. What is clinging like? Clinging binds the mind to the object of desire. Someone who lives with craving and clinging isn't free. Now, if we know what craving and attachment are like, then we will also know what freedom from them is like. We will know the void mind. The void mind is clean and unblemished. In ordinary usage, if something is blemished, then it's said to be soiled or dirty in some way. In the mental world, this dirt is called kilesa, defilement. Kilesa means a dirty thing. If the kilesa enters, then the mind isn't clean. Being free from defiling things and being unblemished is another characteristic of the void mind. If there's nothing to disturb it, then the mind is content. If there is some disturbing factor, then it's not. The mind of the average person is usually uneasy and insecure, so that whenever anything a little odd occurs, it's easily disturbed. If it wasn't for the defilements, the mind would be at peace. The void mind is said to be cool because of the absence of any heat. The defilements represent the heat that arises into the mind because of the way we deal with sense experience. It's because we are careless when we see, hear, smell, touch, taste, think, imagine or whatever, that there comes to be the heat of greed, aversion, and delusion, the heat of defilement, to disturb the mind. If there's no defilement, there won't be any heat either. There will be coolnesses instead. Nibbana means cool. Whenever the mind is away from the kilesa, it's cool. And even if it's just a little touch of this coolness, lasting just for a short time, it will still be Nibbana. We could call that occasional or accidental Nibbana, which though it's just a brief encounter, yet displays the characteristics of Nibbana, of the void mind. Further, the mind stops wandering around. Essentially, it's the kilesa of tanha, craving, that makes the mind wander. Craving or ignorant desire pulls the mind here and there, causes it to wander after the various sense objects, the forms, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and the mental objects arising at the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or in the mind. There is a parable in the Pali texts which illustrates this. Go and catch 6 kinds of animals: a snake that lives in a hole in the ground, a crocodile that lives in the water, a bird that lives mostly in the air, a monkey that lives in a tree, a fox that lives in a cemetery, and a dog that lives in a house. These animals have their own peculiar habitats. Catch them and tie them up and they will each still be drawn towards their natural homes, the bird towards the sky, the animal that lives in a house towards the house, the one that lives in the forest towards the forest, h. These are analogies for the mind being pulled around by tanha, desire arising towards the things we see, hear, smell, h. Because there is something pulling it in so many directions, the mind isn't free, isn't void. When there's no more pulling, then it's said to be stilled. That stillness, that stopping is voidness. The void mind has clarity, while the confused mind doesn't. Instead, it's disturbed by the that come in to trouble it. So take out the things that obstruct its clarity, and it can then function properly and do its duty. When anything is obstructed or hindered, it can't act properly. The mind is the same if it has the obstructing it, then it's not clear. It's a stupid mind without wisdom, not a quick or smart mind. Clarity is another characteristic of the void mind. The void mind is also kevali. This will probably be a strange word for just about everyone to hear, a word that, although it's in the Buddhist texts, it is almost never heard. Kevali is a Pali synonym for the Arahant, true human being, and has the meaning of being joined with or integrated into the whole, that is, being complete. When the mind is free, it goes to the great voidness. The mind is usually not free, rather it's imprisoned, but it can escape from prison, and it can become integrated into the all-encompassing void. Voidness is the same thing as kevali. Kevali is thus another name for the Arahant being void or free. The kevali mind, freed from its bindings and without the usual causes and conditions, sankhar, to concoct it, is amtar, deathless, and it is nibbana, gone to the other shore. So, voidness is freedom from the, and especially from tanha and upadan, craving and attachment. Without suffering, the mind is peaceful and undisturbed. It's cooled, without heat. It's stilled and it doesn't wander around like the mind of an ordinary individual. It's clear and bright and knows all things as it should according to nature, and it's kevali, attained to the universal voidness. All these are characteristics of the void mind, the free mind. Try to observe the mind and see if it displays any of these characteristics. Even having some will be better than none. The fact is that we do, as is appropriate for us as individuals, have times when the mind has some of the qualities of voidness. We want to give a better understanding, so we will explain the two concepts, voidness and the void mind, a little more. Now, voidness is one thing, and the void mind is another. The mind is void or free whenever voidness enters it. Thus, the void mind and the voidness aren't the same thing, but they can't be separated either. If there is both the mind and the voidness together, then there is the void mind. Voidness, if it does nothing, is useless, but if the mind has voidness, then it isn't being disturbed by the defilements, and it experiences contentment. So, as already mentioned, it's free, smooth, peaceful, cool, still, and bright. It's kevali. And because the mind really sees voidness, it's content with that and protects it. It avoids clinging and grabbing at anything and protects the freedom, the voidness, so that it dwells apart from suffering. So, the mind has voidness and is then a void mind, with the voidness making the mind void. There is contentment because of that. There's no need for me to interfere because contentment is experienced by the mind itself, and if the mind is content, then that's enough. After all, it's the mind that does the thinking, so it's the mind, still with ignorance, that thinks there is a me. Because we can think, then we think that we have a self, but it's really because the mind can think that there is the self thought. It's really the mind that feels it to be so. This is Maya, illusion. A Maya isn't a reality, it's an illusion that tricks the mind into seeing something unreal as real. Now, sunyata, voidness, if it's the ultimate variety, is arranged into four modes and is referred to as chatu kotik sunyata, which means four-peaked or four-pinnacled. The koti part of the Pali word means a peak, a high place, like a tower for instance, so chatu kotik means having four peaks. Sunyata then, simply put, has four modes or kinds. If something is the ultimate, it's called kotik, so the ultimate four-peaked voidness is referred to as chatu kotik sunyata. The first peak or the first mode is that there isn't anything that could be called me. The mind feels that there isn't anything that could be me. Secondly, there isn't the anxiety usually associated with or connected to the me thought. The first peak is that there isn't a self, a me. The second refers to the absence of the associated anxiety. The third peak is that there isn't anything that could be called mine, and the fourth peak is the absence of the anxiety generally connected with anything thought of as being mine. Thus, there are four peaks in two pairs. It's a matter of me and mine again. Examine and find out if these kinds of feelings are in the mind, me, and the anxiety that comes with it, and mine plus the associated stress, the direct feelings of me and mine, as well as the indirect feelings of anxiety coming from them. Ultimately, there won't be the slightest feeling of me, or of mine, or any of the associated anxiety either. It will be absolutely, definitely finished. There won't be any doubt about it. This will be the highest voidness, the four-peaked sunyata. It's preserved in this way in the Pali texts. Now, should laypeople know about this subject or not? Think about that, because it's customary among some groups in Thailand to hold the view that laypeople don't need to know about this matter. We were criticized by a Bangkok group for teaching laypeople matters, including sunyata, which they said were too high for them. Nevertheless, we are of the opinion that laypeople need to know about sunyata. After all, it's because they don't know about it that they have to suffer. Sunyata is useful and helpful to people who have to live in the world. Once, the head of a group of householders went to the Buddha and asked him what would be most useful, most helpful for people such as them, for worldly people who have families and still live the worldly life. The Buddha said that sunyata could be of great benefit to them. One layman who was especially famous was Anathapindika. Both the Buddha and his disciples taught Anathapindika about other matters, but they didn't speak to him about sunyata. When he was seriously ill and had reached the last days of his life, Sariputta went to visit him and did talk about it, whereupon the seriously ill Anathapindika bemoaned the fact that for a long time he had listened to the Buddha and his disciples teach, but they hadn't taught him about sunyata at all. Only today had they explained it to him, just today when he was near to death, which meant that he would only get the benefit of such knowledge for a short time. It was regrettable, but had he known about sunyata earlier in his life, then he could have got more from it. So he expressed his disappointment by moaning and groaning a lot. People should think about that and get to know sunyata well in advance, long before death comes, because knowing about voidness can mean being free of suffering for a good part of life. Coming to know sunyata only on the day of one's death means getting just a little taste of the good life, so we ought to know about it as early in our lives as is possible, and then we would have the chance to sustain the void mind, the free mind, for a longer time. People in the world have to live with dukkha. In fact, they have to live with the mass of suffering more than the clerics do, so they have a greater need to know about its quenching. Sunyata, no matter how high-flown or deep it may seem to be, is nevertheless a necessary matter for the layperson to know about. After all, someone in great pain would need a doctor more than someone with little pain. In the same way, people with a lot of dukh should know a lot about sunyata. That would be fair and equitable. Now, it's predicted in the Pali texts that in the future people won't be interested in sunyata, which will spell ruin for the religion. The Buddhist religion will be ruined because when people lose interest in sunyata and turn to some new thing that's not concerned with voidness, that doesn't come from the Buddha, it will signify the end of the religion. This new thing is described in the texts as something put together by philosophers, by bookish people. It will be something new, some new teaching which will be popular but will be foreign to the concept of Nibbana. It will be something those who come after the Buddha will teach, but which won't be the Buddha's actual words, so that they will explain the quenching of dukkha by another method, not by sunyata, and explain it in such a manner that it will attract people. If people are interested in this kind of thing, then they won't be interested in sunyata, and that will make the religion seem like nonsense. When people are more interested in something because it sounds nice, because it's new, then it's the beginning of confusion. Things that attract people foolishly tend to bring forgetfulness of the Dhamma, and when the Dhamma is forgotten, the Vinaya, monastic discipline, will go the same way. Therefore, it's necessary that we keep to the basic principle that nothing should be clung to as I or mine. And we must maintain that one important basic principle is the firm foundation of the Buddhist religion. Sunyata, nothing should be clung to as I or as mine. If people hold to this basic tenet, then the whole of the Buddhist religion, the Mahayana Antharvad, or part of them, or any branch, offshoot, group, sect or creed will retain knowledge of sunyata, but without it, there won't be a Buddhist religion. So, recognize sunyata as being the heart of the genuine Buddhist religion. If we take out sunyata and replace it with something else, then it's the end of the genuine Buddhasasana, Buddhist religion. The Buddha offers a metaphor for this in the tale of the drum, the sacred drum of a Khattiya, Sanskrit, Kshatriya, tribe in ancient India. The Khattiyas were warriors, and this particular tribe had a sacred drum which they couldn't replace, couldn't make anew because it was sacred. They couldn't replace it because if they did, it wouldn't be sacred anymore. Now, some parts of the old drum began to decay, and they replaced these with new wood, but then other parts decayed which they also replaced. They continued on like this, replacing and replacing until the drum no longer contained any of the original wood at all. The point here is that the original and correct Buddhist religion disappears because another matter that isn't sunyata is brought in to replace it. Sunyata is then lost and there isn't a trace of it left. Be well aware that if we take sunyata out, then we let in the me and the mine. Taking out the matter of not self means taking out anatta and replacing it with atta, self, which will spell the end of the true Buddhist religion. Now, let's look at the basis of sunyata, that is, anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Anicca, dukkha, anatta, these three words taken together are sunyata, anicca, impermanent, not stable, uncertain, unsteady, dukkha, abhorrent, hard to bear with, and anatta, not self. Take anicca, dukkha and anatta, put them together, and sunyata is born. Sunyata is anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Suppose someone sees anicca, dukkha, and anatta fully and completely. Then they will see sunyata and know that whatever they experience is free, void of self. An easy to grasp and clear meaning of sunyata is void of self. When we are void of the me illusion, then there can't be a mind either. The mind depends on the me. So, if we are free from the me, that's enough. The mind is gone too. Now, if we have satipana, mindfulness and wisdom, we will see that everything around us, both within and without, has the characteristic of being sunyata. The void mind has to see everything as void, and then it stops, becomes still and doesn't chase after and cling to anything. We can examine ourselves to see if the mind is inclined to cling to anything at all, even to Nibbana, because if mind is correct, truly correct, it won't do that. When the mind doesn't cling, that, then, is the Nibbanic mind, the cool mind, cool because everything that was once seen as being mine is now seen as tattva, as being just what it is, as being just like that, as something that can't be owned. So, we don't aim to take anything to be mine. From the lowest to the highest, the mind is then free and dwells with Nibbana. If the mind takes Nibbana as mine, then it won't be true Nibbana. Be well aware that the condition for Nibbana is to let go and not grasp at anything, so don't take Nibbana to be mine, because if we do it will be a false sort of Nibbana. True Nibbana can't be owned by anybody. Don't cling to anything, that will be enough. Let go. Let the mind reach the void and there won't be any suffering, the mind won't have dukkha. Don't take the mind to be me, and don't take the mental freedom to be mine. Don't take the happiness the mind receives because it's free as mine, there's no need for anything to be mine. Allow everything to be just like that, tattva, just like that. Just let things be what they are. If mind sees suchnas, knows everything as being just like that, then it also knows that it can't own anything. We will need to know this suchnas, this just like that, well. If we can understand everything as void, then all things will be understood in this way, and then the mind will be just like that, the body will be just like that, any feelings and thoughts will be just like that, everything will be just like that, operating according to the law of nature, idapachayata. All things are just like that, just what they are and not otherwise. This is the meaning of tattva. When the mind is free or void of self, it doesn't take anything to be mine, because it knows tattva, knows that all things are just like that. They are simply natures functioning according to the law of nature, the law of idapachayata. Idapachayata can mean just like that too. For instance, it's just like that, 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 refers here to the conditions that give rise to suffering, being themselves just like that, and the result is suffering, or it's just like that, and there is happiness. Tattva, just like that, doesn't refer specifically to happiness or suffering, but indicates the truth of both sukh and dukkha as well as the true nature of the conditions underlying their arising and ceasing. Thus, the conditions are just like that, just like that, just like that, then suffering. That which we don't like appears, or it's like that, like that, like that until happiness and contentment arise. Observe that both happiness and suffering are just like that, just what they are according to nature, and that they arise just like that in accordance with the law of nature, the law of idapachayata. When the mind learns to dislike suffering, it no longer goes in the way that allows it to happen. Rather, it practices to follow that mode of idapachayata, which doesn't allow it to occur. It does this because it has gained the knowledge that there isn't anything that should be clung to as me or mine, that when there is clinging of this sort, the mind gets bitten, knows suffering every time. The mind is then chastened by the experience and turns into the way that doesn't bite, that doesn't hurt. Thus, we come to know the need to walk in the way of correctness, to encourage the correct mode of idapachayata, the one that doesn't cause biting and that doesn't hurt, so that the mind is free and dwells in the void. Some people don't understand this matter at all and prefer captivity, like the captivity coming from indulgence in the delight connected with sexual activity, or whatever. That isn't being free. People return again and again to the delightful and don't see voidness. It would be better for us to dwell equanimously. To be above both delight and revulsion would be the proper way to live. At present, if something delights, it's clung to, and if it repels, it's clung to. It's all clinging, all a matter of me and mine. Dwelling in equanimity, not clinging to anything, we would live in the middle way between the extremes. Consider, for instance, the feelings of being replete and of being hungry, something a child could understand. A child would choose to experience the first of those two, but being full up with food, feeling replete, is that peaceful? Feeling full up disturbs the mind, but feelings of hunger disturb the mind too, so it would be better to be in the middle, to be above feeling full up or feeling hungry. Hence, don't cling to those two feelings and avoid having to experience happiness and suffering. Take to the in-between, that which isn't either and which won't bite. Feeling full up isn't free, feeling hungry isn't free, feeling full of food is uncomfortable, feeling hungry is uncomfortable. If there's no me to feel full or hungry, then that's freedom, that's voidness. So, don't cling to anything, don't cling to the feelings of being full up, or to those of being hungry. Don't cling to the delicious or to the repulsive. We can see for ourselves how the delightful and the repulsive are able to confuse the mind. They both confuse, but they confuse differently. The mind undisturbed by such things would be a free, void mind, a mind without suffering. Come to understand voidness well. Otherwise, the opportunity of being Buddhist will be missed. We will be Buddhists who don't know about sunyata, who waste the opportunity of being Buddhist. It's much the same as wasting life because of not knowing what should be known. This not knowing can't be excused. Not knowing sunyata will bring an unfortunate result, so it ought to be known. I didn't know, please excuse me from suffering, cannot be given as an excuse. The law of idapachayata won't allow it. God won't allow it. Idapachayata is an immutable, unalterable law. Because there is this, then this can arise. Because this isn't, then this isn't going to be either. It goes along in this way all of the time. The law of nature is in this body of ours. Because there is this arises, so should we do the wrong thing, then some physical disorder, some form of dukh will happen immediately. Because we cling to things as mine, and don't allow them to go along according to the law, we get bitten, and then there has to be mental suffering. If we are to avoid suffering, we will need to acknowledge idapachayata and learn to behave accordingly, that is, come to see that, whatever it is, it's tattva, it's just like that, so that we aren't deceived into clinging to anything. This is to know voidness, when the mind doesn't cling and is freed from all suffering. The void mind is exceedingly sharp and functions entirely according to the law of idapachayata. The void mind is peaceful and complete, and does everything in line with the law of nature. So, if we want to be free from any form of suffering, then we should dwell with a void mind. We should abide in the void, abide in the sunyata vihar, and not allow any sense contact to happen carelessly with a mind that isn't free. So, Whether standing, walking, sitting, lying down, or whatever, do it with a void mind. Do it without the feeling that anything is mine. People have to work in some way. Almost without exception, everybody has to work, so when we work, we should do it with a clever, bright mind, a void mind, and not with a mind that is ponderous and heavy. Don't work with a tense mind, a clinging mind, do it with a clear mind, a void mind. When resting, do it with a free mind, because if the mind isn't free, if it isn't void, there's no real rest and relaxation. When we do anything, working, meeting with people, relaxing, and so on, we do it with a free mind. If the mind isn't free, if it's irritated, disturbed by something, it suffers. Even when dealing with a troublesome matter, the mind should remain still and void. We will need to do our best when we fall ill. When we are sick, it's most important to be sick with a free mind, because then we will recover quickly, or if we should happen to die, we will die well. If anyone would recover from illness quickly, then they should keep the mind void, free from clinging during the time that they are ill, being aware that the malady is really just like that, just thus. Sickness is tattva, just like that, and doesn't really have any power to oppress, to bully the mind. Sickness is something quite ordinary, not anything we should be afraid of, not anything capable of creating suffering. If we recover from sickness, it's just like that, too. There's no undue mental disturbance. It's not something that needs to trouble or please the mind. So if we are ill, then we let it happen with an ordinary mind, a steady mind, without the me and mine, without the me who's sick, without the me who's going to die. Work with a void mind, relax with a void mind, meet people with a void mind, experience deadly illness with a void mind, die with a void mind if we should die, then let the end come with a void mind, without the me and mine, and there won't be any suffering at all. There is a saying that most people nowadays don't understand. There is sickness, but there isn't anyone who's sick. There is the sickness, but there isn't anyone who experiences it. We believe that, I'm sick, I'm going to die, me, when in truth, this me doesn't exist. It sounds odd. There is the sickness, but there isn't anyone who is sick. There is dukh, but there isn't anyone who experiences it. There is the feeling of dukh, but there isn't anyone who suffers it, or anyone who owns it. There is just the mental feeling. There is the doing of the many and various things, but there isn't anyone who does them. In reality, they are induced through the law of idapachayata. There is walking, but no one walks. There is walking to the temple, for instance, but there isn't anyone who does it, because the walker isn't a person, it's a stream of idapachayata. If one can see in this way, it's called seeing sunyata. Thus, try to practice so that the mind doesn't cling to anything and there won't be any problems. Instead, there will be the coolness, the quenching of suffering, but there won't be anyone who is cooled, quenched. Nibbana is the ultimate voidness, free from suffering, void of self. Nibbana may be the ultimate voidness, but there will still be the feelings normal for one who's alive and has the senses. Like the feeling arising from anything that comes into contact with the body in whatever way, there will still be these kinds of feelings, but as there won't be any clinging, then there won't be any suffering, even when there are the feelings associated with hunger, sickness, tiredness, or whatever. Life will still go along, and the body will still function and must feel hunger, thirst, desire to defecate and urinate, and so on and so forth. Hence, there will still be feelings because the body will still be sensitive, but there won't be a me who does the feeling, so there won't be any suffering, only the disturbances natural to a living being. If hunger, thirst, pain, desire, eating, excreting itch produces a troublesome feeling, then it's a natural event. Just recognize that it's idapachayata, it's happening naturally, and don't make it into dukh. Don't cling and allow the kilesa to make it into suffering. We should practice like this. Sunyata is necessary for one who would be dukh-free. Anyone wanting to be free from suffering will have to dwell in the void, not clinging to anything as me or mine, with a mind in which the defilements don't arise and suffering doesn't happen. Knowing this, we can try to practice so that we don't waste the good luck that is brought us into contact with the Buddhist religion and with the opportunity of ending suffering. Sunyata, or a life lived with sunyata, is a matter that Buddhists, laypeople included, need to know about. Therefore, let's help each other to learn about sunyata. Let's help each other to practice it and get the result, the benefit, until we are able to abide in the void, to live life with a free mind, a void mind, minus the nervous diseases we are prone to now. At present, people the world over suffer from nervous disorders because they aren't sunyata. Take a look, the human world is a nervous place.